Hello, my name is Dr. Gary Danelski, and my interviewing colleague with me today is Dr. Sally Wilson.
Good morning.
Today is November 18th, 2012, and Sally and I are here to interview Dr. Fred Frese as part of the OPA Oral History Project. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning.
Let me begin by reviewing a bit about you for our audience. Frederick J. Frese III, Ph.D., is a psychologist with over 40 years' experience in public mental health care. He is presently an associate professor of psychiatry at Northeast Ohio Medical University and clinical assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University. He is coordinator of the Summit County Recovery Project. For 15 years until his retirement in 1995, Fred was director of psychology at Western Reserve Psychiatric Hospital. Fred was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young Marine Corps officer. Despite this, he was able to gain a Bachelor of Science degree from Tulane University, a Bachelor of Foreign Trade degree from the American Graduate School of International Management, and a doctorate in psychology from Ohio University. He has authored many articles and book chapters and has lectured widely on the subject of schizophrenia. Fred founded the Community and State Hospital section of the American Psychological Association and is past president of the National Mental Health Consumers Association. He served on the board of directors of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, and is also on the board of scientific advisors for Schizophrenia Bulletin. He has received many awards for his contributions and has appeared on national TV, including CNN, NPR, Nightline, and the ABC Evening News. He has also co-produced a widely distributed training video about coping with schizophrenia. Dr. Frese has held a variety of leadership positions within the American Psychological Association and has received a number of awards from APA, including the Distinguished Service Award and a Presidential Citation. Fred has also been quite active in the leadership of the Ohio Psychological Association, including the Board of Trustees from 1983 to 1992, Chair of the Committee on Homeless and the Seriously Mentally Ill from 1988 to 92, and member of the Public Service Committee since 1990. He's also been recognized for his contributions to OPA by being awarded the Public Sector Psychologist of the Year in 1992 and the Outstanding Achievement Award in 1990. Welcome, Fred, to this interview with you as part of the OPA Oral History Project.
Well, thank you, Gary. What a nice, flattering overview there.
We're really pleased to have you, and we thought we would start with you, as we often do with interviewees, to ask you, have you been a Northeast Ohio resident your entire life? What about your early background would you like to tell us?
I have been in Northeast Ohio since 1976, the bicentennial year, and in Ohio for about 10 years previous to that. But I was reared a military brat all over the place, from Bermuda to Japan and lots of places in between. And I find it very interesting, because my major interest is in advocacy, is that very disproportionately large number of the advocacy leaders, that is, those who are open about having serious mental illness or psychotic conditions, are also military brat. Kate Jamison, of course, is the MacArthur Genius Award-winning high-profile leader whose dad was in the Air Force, the current president of the National NAMI, who had schizoaffective, charismatic. Dad was an Army career officer, and S.O. Leet, one of the earliest, was also one of these military brats. So I think that the recent uncovering by our British friends of the relationship between instability in childhood and the correlation between migration and likelihood of developing schizophrenia. While there haven't been any studies of us military brats, the fact that we move around so much, I think, may possibly contribute to the fact that we break down with these psychotic conditions as adults.
So you lived in many places, and you came to Northeast Ohio specifically for?
Specifically, when I had my breakdown in the Marine Corps, as with most folks who, almost all who have their breakdowns, our delusions, the false belief, wouldn't be a delusion if we knew it was a delusion. So in my mind, there was nothing wrong with me. And so I went to this fancy graduate school in business and didn't tell anybody. I'd just come out of the psych ward, of course. And one of the recruiters gave me a job here in Ohio. And I was destined to be I didn't know it, they told me later, the liaison out of the Tokyo office for a large corporation called Coring, which had 3 entities in Ohio. Lorraine Cranes, or through Shovel in Lorraine, they had a Master Corporation in Dayton, and their biggest one was right down 271. If you take the exit with cobwebs, it's Mount Gilead. Their largest company made these hydraulic press manufacturers, and used to have they also made die casting machines. I remember their phrase was "be a master fast caster with cast master." I remember that to this day. Worked on them about 3 months, and then went off to Milwaukee for a management meeting and had another breakdown there.
So
I wanted to get, sorry, it's a long time to tell me how I got up here. So I spent a year and a half just wandering the country and being hospitalized in Texas and Alabama. And I finally was picked up and I decided to come back to Ohio because I had some friends here. And that's where they picked me up and stuck me in the nation's largest psychiatric hospital in one building. In fact, the largest building of any kind in the entire country until they completed the Pentagon. That's quite an honor to be a guest there in the summer of '68. And that's where they discovered, after declaring me insane and putting me away, and of course the Kraepelinian view of schizophrenia was just like the line out of The Beautiful Mind, and if you saw the movie,
yes.
You may look like you're getting better from time to time, but you're not. Your brain is atrophying within your skull, and you'll be cared for the rest of your life under the state hospital system. Yeah. So I was for a couple of weeks, but then they discovered I was a veteran and wanted to save money, so they sent me down to Chillicothe, where that's where I had my turnaround. Thanks to a psychologist, actually.
Wonderful.
Fred, let's back up just a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about your early personal and academic life? Basically, what your career aspirations were initially, undergraduate education, and your early career plans.
Okay, well, I was, as I mentioned, reared in military, and I was awarded a National Navy scholarship. They sent me off to Tulane, so while there they encouraged you to, in those days the Navy thought leadership was very much connected with psychology, so they encouraged you to major in psychology, which I did, and went into, took the Marine Corps option, and went through Quantico and then a couple of tours in Japan, came back to work at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, and that's where I had my psychotic break. So, am I responding to your question?
Yes, and your degree in business, that foreign trade degree. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, it was very interesting because I'd never heard of the place. But while I was in the psychiatric ward for 5 months, I was talking to a lot of other naval officers and Marine Corps officers, and they happened to mention there was a school up in Phoenix that that a lot of very big firms recruited at. Nobody had ever really heard of it, but if you want to get a job, that would be a good place to go. So later, now it's the #1 rated international school in the world. But at the time, it was very easy to get into, quite frankly. And so I got a degree from that graduate school.
So you have an MBA?
No, at that time, they did offer a master's degree, but that was not a good thing to do because they recruited, it was a 3-semester program. After 2 semesters, you got a bachelor's degree. And that's where the recruiters came in and recruited 90-something% of the class. The only people who went on for a master's is if you didn't get a job. So it was not I mean, in the rest of the world, it would be a very positive thing, but at the time, it was not a good thing to have. Subsequently, now they only offer a master's degree, of course. But
Yeah, makes sense to me. I've heard similar things from other business schools too. Well, at what point then, you were in the Marine Corps, and you told us a little bit about that, and you had your breakdown when you were in the Marine Corps, and you ended up in graduate school in psychology down the road there.
Yeah. I had really studied very hard Japanese while I was in Japan, and because I was tailoring my career to be a international businessman, and it was working very well. I got lots of job offers coming out of the graduate school in business. So they sent me here, and that's when I said, about after 2 or 3 months, they brought me for a week's training in Milwaukee, their headquarters, and that's where I had another breakdown. And so they didn't know that I had this psychiatric condition. They didn't ask. In fact, that's why I took that job offer. I had 8 job offers, but the other 7 all asked me to fill out health forms, but this one didn't. So that's why I took the job in big part. But then they knew, and of course, my career in big business was over. I actually took a lot of job interviews afterwards. They all said we don't hire people with mental illness, one way or the other. So broke my heart, but I was out of work for a year and a half, and my life was over. And just happened to have I was living with 18 guys at Ohio State in a house, and I wasn't doing anything. I was very depressed. One of them had a internship with the state of Ohio and found out I had a psychology degree, and they needed psychologists. In those days, to be a psychologist, all you needed was a bachelor's degree and to have a test, take a test. And so I did that and was offered I was put away again in Columbus and then Chillicothe. But then I was able to get the job in Chillicothe. 2 big operations in Chillicothe. One's the VA hospital, and right across the street is a correctional facility. And I was at both of them. One as an inmate and one as a psychologist, bachelor's level psychologist. But I was working with a rather famous psychologist at the time named Leiter, Russell G. Leiter. And he put out IQ tests, so that's what we did, was develop IQ tests and administer them to the inmates. Yeah. And after 3 years, I went off to Ohio University. I had been security officer in the Marine Corps, and thought that I wanted to study something related to security work. But of course, most psychology departments don't. But there was this one field called psychophysiology that I thought was related to the polygraph, which was lie detection. Well, they didn't think it was related to that at all, but that was my specialty. And I actually, with a lot of political resistance, huge, I was able to actually do it. I think I was the 3rd psychologist in history to do a dissertation on the polygraph. So then I became quickly the associate editor of the Polygraph Journal, which is essentially controlled out of NSA. A few years later, they actually called me to offer me the job of heading up the Department of Defense was going to establish a polygraph research center. and they offered me the job, but I had to fly in to sign some papers. And when I got there, they wouldn't even look at me. And I thought, something's strange here. So I grabbed the guy and said, you called me and asked me to come here to sign. He said, oh, we couldn't possibly hire you. I said, why not? He said, we got your records from the Department of Defense, and you're schizophrenic. And I said, well, I told you I'm schizophrenic. And he said, yeah, but you didn't tell us you're really schizophrenic. And I said, so that's what ended my career in security and psychology, and took me out 3 months, and that's when I decided this is wrong, that 1% of the population has schizophrenia, another 2% have bipolar illness. There are lots of folks, and a lot of us do recover, and nobody tells anybody. So that's when I decided, without much thought ahead of time, that I would be more open. So really open.
Those experiences must have also played a big role in getting you set up to do the advocacy work that you've done. Because
absolutely.
You've seen firsthand what it's like when
I was working
you had a label like that.
In the state hospital. Actually, the Department of Mental Health had paid my way through graduate school to some degree, so I owed them a few years. And then they quit. As soon as I got my license, they made me the director of psychology, so it was a pretty good job. So, plus the fact, in my mind, I thought I'd never get a job anywhere else. And I often think that biggest motivating factor in my life was that year and a half I spent without work. And so that's why, major reason why I stayed at the state hospital for virtually my entire career.
Well, you currently work as coordinator of the Summit County and Ohio Recovery Project, I
Yes.
understand. Could you briefly describe what this project is and what your role is there?
Well, we have a number of consumer organizations, and of course NAMI, and I actually founded a couple of the consumer organizations, an advocacy group, and we have a drop-in center, library type thing. And so my job is to liaison with the advocacy community in Summit County and elsewhere. It's only a part-time job, 3 days a week, and it's very flexible. And so that's what's enabled me to serve on a lot of boards, NAMI and NISH and the Treatment Advocacy Center and the National Occupational Therapy Board and the Public Service Board for OPA and others.
How successful have you been in trying to get organized, like psychology, to do more work in this advocacy area? I know that.
Okay, you got good. You're getting me. Now you get to the question I wanted to ask. Started out with like a lot of things do, with the person wants to do something gets a little angry. And what happened was, in the 80s, I was psychology director, and the superintendent wanted more psychologists. And so I figured out that our salaries weren't that high, but we had an incentive, and that was we could supervise people who had their PhDs but had to get licensed. So I hired lots of PhDs, unlicensed, and I had a staff of 40. And so there was a Cleveland Psychological Association, but there was nothing in Northeast Ohio beyond that. So having 40 psychologists on my staff, I just said, okay, why don't we create an organization? So we created the Psychological Society of the Western Reserve, and then we petitioned the OPA for a seat, because it said if you had 25 members or more, you could do it. So that's why I served on the OPA board. Then Dan Sanders came with us, and he took a place on the board. I think he was the first elected African American president of the OPA. So, and we were particularly interested in public service and homelessness and that sort of thing. So it was apparent to me, and Gary was on the board with me at the time, that the majority of the OPA board members were not real interested in the public service. But there was Ken Drude, who was also a psychology director, and he was also the editor of the Vision 18's newsletter, which was for Vision 18 for the whole country. And I started getting it, and there was no mention of anything to do with serving the seriously mentally ill, except peripherally with the Veterans Administration. So that's when I decided we need to have an organizational entity within the APA for psychologists serving seriously mentally ill in state hospitals and community mental health centers. And so, with Pat De Leon's assistance, who always wanted public service activities endorsed, and a lot of help from the VA, we established with myself as the founding president, and Ken Darude, and another Buckeye, Art Aronson, were 3 of the initial 7 members on the board. And that was the first launch. It still exists. But then after that, we, some of us, with NAMI help, was able to get the APA to establish the task force on seriously mentally ill. And so that's an entity of the APA, which initially they thought might be just short term, but it's still going on. It's got about a dozen members, and that's really the entity within the APA. We did get the APA 1 year at their national convention to focus on the seriously mentally ill. That was in Boston, and that came about because SAMHSA had done an interesting thing, and that was they took a room full of maybe 24 people, a dozen psychologists and a dozen of those of us in recovery. They did it with a psychiatrist and the social worker, but psychology. And I really intimidated them by saying that psychology, naturally I use a little hyperbole, psychologists have never done anything, never lifted a finger for the seriously mentally ill. And they were taken aback and, oh yes we have. I said, what? And they couldn't come up with an answer. They said, well, we're going to do something at the convention. So they focused on it 1 year. So we still got the task force going, we've still got the section going, and we still got public service section of the OPA going, which is getting a lot more interest now than it traditionally has had. So,
just a question, was Pat De Leon our first psychologist in the U.S. Senate? Right.
Well, one, he's not in the U.S. Senate.
Was.
He was chief of staff
for
Senator Inoue. He was with him 28 years.
Okay.
And recently, he teaches at the same place where I teach. I give a 2-hour lecture every year at USIS, which is the another medical school nobody's ever heard of. It's the military's medical school, Uniformed Services Health Science University.
Do they have prescription privileges there for psychologists?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'll get to my direct answer to that. But what happened was I became open about having schizophrenia, and I was serving on the national board of Division 18 because I was the president of one of their sections. And at that meeting, a fellow from NIMH came in, psychologist, and said, we're having a big gathering, like 36 of the psychologists who are interested in the seriously mentally ill, and we're co-sponsoring with NAMI, the APA, and NIMH in Houston. And would I be interested in going? I said, well, let's see what I can do. So I went down there, and there were really the biggest names in psychology dealing with the seriously mentally ill. There were not a lot of them, but a number of them were in NAMI, specifically Harriet Leffley and Dale Johnson. And everybody had to give a speech. In my speech, they had this meeting because they wanted to forge a partnership between NAMI, the family members, and the APA. That was explicit. And my speech was, no, it shouldn't just be a two-way partnership, it should be a three-way partnership to include persons who have recovered and are the family members with the disorder. But in my speech, even though I had it written, I think I said, and we would like to be included. I couldn't read the we. I mean, it was, and I said they would like to be included. But Harriet Leffley and Dale Johnson's wife, who is also there, PhD, they saw right through that. And I was so emotional, I went into the men's room afterwards, and I came out, they were waiting there for me. I'd been crying. And they adopted me and put me on the National NAMI Curriculum and Training Committee. And Curriculum and Training Committee had 3 psychologists, 3 psychiatrists, 3 social workers, and 3 nurses. And our purpose was to get the curriculum changed. And they just invited me there. And while I was there, the 3rd psychologist, Scotty Hargroves, had real connection with the APA, decided we ought to put a program on at the APA, which is going to be in New Orleans, and invited me to give the talk. And so I did. I was the first person with a psychotic condition. No, I was the first psychologist with the condition to give a talk. And almost nobody in the room. In fact, I think the 4 of us almost outnumbered the number of people. Thing like APA can be. But the next monitor that came out, full half page, was on me with my picture in the middle and the headlines, psychologists prevailed despite schizophrenia. And I got letters from all over the place, including one from Pat De Leon. And they all said the same thing. I admire your courage, one way or another. And my brain said, well, there's a thin line between courage and stupidity, and I'm about to find out what side of that line I'm on. And so far, it's eventually they got rid of me from the state hospital, but so far it's been a guy flew in to sign me up for a movie contract, and I mean it was a big heavy thing right away.
Do you care to say anything more about OPA, or should we move on to other things?
OPA, I think, reflected national in when we, being NAMI, started beating our drums and flexing our muscles. Dale Johnson, Harriet Leffley felt very strongly that we should be presenting at the APA. And it was very important to NAMI to get people to understand that serious mental illness, not all mental illness, but serious, were brain diseases. And so that was the message, and it was tremendous resistance from organized psychologists. Some of the, George Albee had the names he had with NAMI were almost not repeatable in polite society. Tremendous resistance, and I think that was reflected at the OPA as well. Pretty much, took their lead from the APA. That's changed tremendously here in just the last couple of years. The OPA and the Ohio Psychiatric Physicians Association and NAMI are all backing very strongly a bill to clarify the outpatient commitment law that we have here that's used in some counties but not in others because it's the law is just not clear. So, and once again, OPA has endorsed our public service subcommittee, which has been meeting regularly for 20-something years now.
Do you feel then that progress is being made in general within psychology to become more aware of this issue and to do more advocacy work?
Well, let me get back to, thank you, to your comment on the prescription privileges. What clearly changed the APA's position that mental illnesses were not physiological was Pat de Leon's deciding we should go for prescription privileges. Well, if the disorder is not physiological, why would you need a pill for them? And so suddenly there was a shift toward NAMIs, which was highly resisted initially, that serious mental illnesses or brain disorder. Now the APA, without ever coming out and saying they were wrong, clearly shifted, and it took a while, but became much more amenable to a recognition of serious mental illnesses having something to do with the brain. That pendulum's swinging back a bit now. Cognitive behavior therapy, and something real big nationally led here in the Cleveland area is cognitive enhancement therapy, or non-invasive methods of addressing particularly our neurocognitive deficits.
Do you feel they've been pretty useful, these new developments, as far as
tremendous? CBT is the psychological therapeutic type approach for individuals with schizophrenia and similar diseases. And initially I was part of the Matrix effort coming out of NIMH, sponsored by FDA and about 12 big pharma companies, that because they realized that people could work even if they had hallucinations and delusions, but could not work if they had neurocognitive deficits. Big Pharma decided they were going to try to put some pills together for the deficits. And so there was a lot of enthusiasm of that initially. But then it turns out that these computerized training, luminosity type things actually, work better than any of the pills they've been able to come up with so far anyway. So.
We've talked a good bit about the work with advocacy within professional associations. It occurs to me as you're speaking that some of that advocacy could also be applied to people with the disorder themselves. Because so many people, I'm thinking, for whatever reason, you didn't give up when the doors were slammed in your face a bunch of times. You kept trying, and you turned your life around. Many people with that diagnosis don't do that. What can we do to get the message out to those folks?
Well, the mantras of the movement, and this is the movement of those disabled with serious mental illness. We've got organizations. One meets every year called Alternatives. Initially it was called CHIRPO, the Conference on Human Rights and Against Psychiatric Oppression, but they changed that name when the Fed started funding them. And we've got national organizations and that sort of thing. And our mantras are, one taken from the civil anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, nothing about us without us. And that's because we early on figured out if we weren't at the table, we're quite likely to be on the menu, if you will. So nothing about us without us. Then advocacy is the best therapy. So rather than sit around and moan about how terrible your life is and you don't have any friends and whatnot, if you get out there and engage in our advocacy efforts, I must spend some time carrying a sign saying, "Fry eggs, not brains," for instance. Get out there and get the message out that those of us who have been, let's face it, the history of treatment of those of us with mental illness are lobotomies and injecting us with malaria and hepatitis, and wasn't real good until the 50s and Thorazine came along, and then even Thorazine had akathisia, and a lot of us thought about committing suicide, and in fact some did. Just as the side effects of those medications. So Big Pharma doesn't like to advertise that, but in fact it was the case. In fact, as everyone knows, John F. Kennedy, his older sister, had that lobotomy in the early 40s. So we want, the lobotomies were actually given big time here in Ohio, particularly down in Athens State Hospital. Dr. Freeman had a trailer he drove around in state hospitals and gave it. It was actually, I understand, given until 72, which means I could have had one early on, particularly when state hospital. But although lots of my patients had had them, I dodged that bullet. But I consider myself lucky not to have been forceful.
Just as a follow-up, can you describe within yourself what it took to not give up? In other words, to continue struggling and to turn your life around the way you have. Can you?
Here's what I give in my speeches. That the turnaround and was when they moved me from the state hospital, Columbus, to Chillicothe. I was there a few weeks, and this psychologist came up to me, and he was had a white coat on. Yeah, I think he was an intern from Ohio State, and he gave me all these tests. He gave me I remember there was a TAT and the Wechsler and the Stanford Burnett. He gave me a whole bunch of them. And he came back a couple of days later with this sad look on his face. And I said, "What's the matter, Doc? Didn't I do well on your test?" And he says, "No, Fred, just the opposite. You did very well. In fact, if it weren't for your condition, you might even have become a professional." And so I heard that. And it must be a little thing about liking a challenge and being determined. Because, I did marry a Catholic nun, so I figure 37 years ago. But I think that determination, it was like, you can't do this, was my challenge. And managed to pull it off with lots of near misses along the way.
Certainly did.
In fact, I had a couple of breakdowns while I was in graduate school. Once I was hospitalized here in Cleveland at the old Woodruff Psychiatric Hospital. And I'm sure the faculty members considered cutting me loose, but for some reason they decided to keep me.
Yeah. Were the hospitalizations helpful to you at the time? I mean, did you feel that they helped turn your life around too, or did you have to kind of do it yourself despite the experiences there?
Well, they're almost all involuntary, so I would probably have done very dangerous and strange things had they not picked me up. Yeah. Once I was handing out money in the middle of the street to cars passing by in Columbus. When you're in psychosis, as you know, you tend to behave in.
But you had faith in yourself. Yeah, you had faith in yourself in the long run.
Well, I think there are a lot of folks, current critical mass of psychiatric research and psychological researchers currently is about a third of us who have these psychotic conditions recover. Of course, when I first came down with this, they said that as well, but I said, well, like who? Well, we can't tell you. Nobody would ever admit they had these conditions. I mean, it's even today I advise. I published an article with Ellen Sachs and Ed Knight in '09 in Schizophrenia Bulletin, identifying 10 psychiatrists and psychologists and a few other PhDs in mental health, all diagnosed with schizophrenia. Didn't let the bipolar folks in. And since that time, I've had a lot of psychologists contact me, PhDs generally, not all psychologists, telling me they had these conditions. But I generally tell them probably not a good idea to be open about it until you're close to retirement or you've got tenure. Like Ellen Sachs, she became the associate dean of the law school at USC. Never told anybody she'd been hospitalized numerous times, once for 5 months while she was at Yale. But once she got tenure, then she came out with a book that was Time Magazine's one of the 10 best of the year type of thing. And but once you're it's not a threat to your career so much. And even there, both her and Kay Jameson both won the MacArthur Genius Awards, were very careful and took a leap of faith, because both of them concerned Kay about whether or not she could keep her license. And there was some question about that after she became open. Ellen didn't become a psychologist. She had an APA member until after the book actually came out. So she got her JD from Yale and her PhD in psychology.
Was it difficult for you to make that decision to come out to let people know?
My motivations were the law here in Ohio changed. And Pam Hyde, who now heads up all SAMHSA, was the mental health director, and a lawyer. She got the law changed that said every one of the funding boards, the ADM boards, had to have a recovered person as a member. And so I found out about this, and I said, well, that's an opportunity for me. So I actually applied. She appointed me as the first consumer at the Summit County's board, but they didn't tell anybody. Nobody told anybody. And so one day I'm at Kent State, just giving a talk as the invited head of psychology, and I got up and said, well, let's see here. How many of you graduate students actually know anything about serious mental illness? How many of you have actually been picked up in the streets, delusional, psychotic yourself, and put away, declared insane, and put away in the back of a state hospital in seclusion? How many? Stand up, identify yourself. Of course, none of them did. But I was standing, and I said, well, I guess I'm the only one standing here, aren't I? And I did not plan to say that. It just came out.
Well, I noticed the language is slightly different for you as a recovered schizophrenic in contrast to the addictionology, which talks about recovering. And that's an interesting point.
Now, did I say I'm recovered?
Well, no, but you use the term recovered.
Okay, because normally I characterize myself as a person in recovery. I don't pretend that I don't have this disorder anymore, because I take medications and have occasional flare-ups and those sorts of things.
Okay, well, that's helpful for me, for my understanding. Thank you.
But that terminology is very tricky. As to, what do you call us? Are we consumers? Are we survivors? Are we ex-patients? In Britain, we're called service users, and they drop the service. They just call us users. Of course, I told them it wouldn't go over well in our country. But there's no agreement amongst us as to, you're going to offend somebody no matter what you call us. So you have to be careful. I mean, if you want to converse with those in the advocacy.
Do you feel that the public in general has become a little more accepting of the fact that people can be in recovery and live useful, productive lives? It's like...
Well, let me go over get into the thesis.
Okay.
I came open, and I was just about the only person. There was another, at Alternatives, I would meet, there were two other professionals, one psychiatrist named Dan Fisher, and one psychologist named Pat Deegan. And we'd all been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And they were sort of open at the convention, but they weren't open big time. Pat was. So I was just about on my own. But I was very active with NAMI, and NAMI was very closely allied with the biological research psychiatrist at NIMH. And the head of one of those divisions was married to this gal named Kay Jameson, the psychologist at Johns Hopkins. And she did a wonderful thing for us in the early 90s. She published a book in a Scientific American article identifying the fact that while 3 to 5% of the population has serious mental illness, if you look at the best artists and the best playwrights and the best writers, and it tends to be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of them. And so her thesis was, and then a few years later she came up with the fact that she herself was manic depressed. Her thesis was persons with serious mental illness could be real, serious contributors in the arts. But as she said, if somebody had psychosis and were diagnosed with schizophrenia, they can't be creative. They had to be manic depressive. Well, naturally, this hurt my feelings. But even when she came out, but that was the demarcation. Suddenly, it was for manic depressive, they could make contributions, but a person with schizophrenia couldn't. We were still caught in the Kraepelinian dictum: you not only don't you recover, you only get worse. And so that was the way it was until the movie. I just had the honor of spending 3 days with John Nash of The Beautiful Mind. And that, for the first time, began to say, okay, people with schizophrenia, at least one, and won a Nobel Prize, and they can make a contribution. Then, of course, when Ellen Sachs came out, and then I also produced a book in 2000 or so with 10 chapters. It's on organized psychology and the treatment of the seriously mentally ill. And it's edited, but 3 of the chapters are written by psychologists with schizophrenia. So my move has been try to get obviously accomplished doctoral level folks in the mental health system who are open about this as a way of fighting the stigma. Because my feeling is, you got all these anti-stigma campaigns, things only get worse. But what does effectively fight the stigma is somebody with the condition can stand up and say, yes, some of us can recover and do well, so stop calling us all wackos and nutcases and those sorts of things.
This is a wonderful interview in many ways, and one of the things that it might have been is located in the Fred Frese room.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Can you tell us about the Fred Frese room?
It's actually the doctor's Fred and Penny Frese room.
Oh, wonderful.
It's my wife does a lot of mental health stuff as well. She's founded a couple of organizations and she sits on the Morgan board. One of the directors there decided he wanted to name the rooms after folks from the Akron area. Well, he named 2 of them after Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, because AA was founded there, and Sister Ignatia, who's also the one who put together the first alcohol ward and hospital in the country. And that was a substance abuse size for the mental health and addictions, but they wanted somebody for the mental health side, and so they decided to name a room after Maggie Carroll Smith, who was the founder of NAMI in Summit County, and one after myself, and I got the biggest room. It's really not fair. It's a little embarrassing.
What's on the wall? I understand that there are various things on the wall. Are there plaques?
The big thing that's really on the wall is a picture of me and Penny, and then they also give out a Doctor's Frese Award every year at their annual ADM thing, and they've got plaques with who won it each year since they've done that, which has been.
And it's in honor of you and your wife, but also how do they choose the recipients of that award?
I don't know.
Oh.
They don't let me have input.
Okay.
But they have a big affair every year, and there are actually several awards. Maggie Carroll Smith Award in the rooms.
Anything else, any other topic you'd like to discuss that we haven't touched on here today, Fred?
Well, you were able to touch on the message I want to get out is that, some big one I forgot. When I'm locked up in the seclusion room in Columbus State Hospital, this is 68, this is the civil rights era. And so we are a marginalized people. I mean, we can't get jobs, we're called all these discriminating names. And these other groups are organizing, African Americans and Hispanics. But I'm thinking, I'm looking out at my fellow travelers out in the day room. There's a hole like this in the seclusion door. And I say, well, I thought we'll never organize it. We're never going to change anything. That was in '68. But in '71 or '2, a fellow who had been in World War II as an adolescent, he and his brother were Polish Jewish and picked up by the Nazis and kept in 6 concentration camps and subcamps. And then after the war, this fellow lived through it, went to New York, learned English, got his doctorate in psychology, and got a teaching position in University of Kansas, and did his summers at Topeka State Hospital. And while he was there, he has this epiphany that the patients are being treated an awful lot like he was treated when he was in the concentration camp. And so his name is Louis Friedman. He and I email each other from time to time. And he decided he was going to get together recent patients, and they were going to start having these meetings. And so that's where our annual meeting started. He and actually there was another psychologist, I think his name was out of Detroit, named Hirsch, who helped him. But they were not beloved by organized psychology for this. They were accused of violating boundary issues, and the psychiatrist gave me even harder time. They sued him, which later dropped. But so it was actually psychologists, 2 of them. But particularly my friend Louis Friedman, F-R-Y-D-M-A-N, who for a number of years was the fellow who helped organize the movement, as we call it. So that's one element I really wish psychology would pick up on. I wish they would take a little more credit between him, Kay Jamison, and Ellen Sachs. Both have won the MacArthur Genius Award. Both are psychologists. So there's been a lot of psychological input, but for some reason APA and even OPA aren't picking up on this, and they should.
Follow up on that, what would you like to see them do, OPA, APA, organized psychology, to do more in this area?
Well, I think the APA did a real good thing when they had the National Convention have focus on it, but then they dropped it. I think they need to, actually the psychiatrists do a better job, because they've got a subgroup, which I'm a liaison member to, called the American Association of Community Psychiatrists. And they really reach out to recovering people and make sure they're included in all of their meetings and have presentations. That I think psychology needs to do more of that. In fact, there are a good number of psychologists involved. They just tend to not be associated with psychology organizations. In fact, that Matrix initiative on they're all neuropsychologists come up to develop the treatments for cognitive deficits. But I know these guys real well. I was on their committees for 10 years. They go to the APA, they go to all kind of reading, but they don't associate with it. Organized psychology there.
Well, anything else you'd like to mention before we call this delightful interview to a close?
Thank you for saying it's been a delight for myself, for sure. And thank you for letting me get in my agenda here, which is to try to get persons in recovery from these conditions to be more comfortable being open about it, and to get professional, or we'll get one more thing here. Tremendous prejudice against persons in recovery from mental illness by the professions. All over the place. I'll give talks of psychology, And I'll say, okay, how many people with serious mental illness? Never any. Because I was told by several, we got a final anecdote here for you. There was this fellow with paranoid schizophrenia who did real well in schools and GREs, applied for psychology. He wanted to be a psychologist. He got turned down by every one of them and then committed suicide. Well, his mother got very upset about this and went into the local dean of the psychology school. She said, is it possible that my son was turned down even though he had all these credentials because he was open about having paranoid schizophrenia? And the dean said to her, Mrs. Slovanovich, I have to tell you that in fact there is some feeling that persons with serious mental illnesses probably should not become clinical psychologists. And she said, thank you very much. In fact, I'm so appreciative of what you've told me. I am going to write out a check for you in your department right now for $2.4 million. The only stipulation is you will only be able to use it for scholarships for persons in recovery from serious mental illness. That was at Nova Southeastern. The dean was Ron Levant, who later became president of the OPA. But they got a very proactive, and he's the one that told me this story, very proactive reach out to persons in recovery program there at Nova Southeastern.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for
thank
coming
you.
to Cleveland for this interview, and
Well,
thank you
thank
for
you.
all the things that you've offered here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
well,
thank you also for showing the courage throughout your lifetime and your career to do what you've done and make a very
Yeah.
significant contribution.
don't put this on the TV, but you said something
Wait,
that
then let's turn it
that
off.
you